All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast, a show about the incredible people dedicated to helping those who have experienced trauma. My name is Guy McPherson, and my mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to inspire each of us to help those around us. What I want to do is kind of ask you about an early clinical error. You know, this podcast really is about getting to know your journey, your pathway. You know, we talked a little bit about what got you into this field. Share with us, if you will, an early clinical error you made that, perhaps has influenced you and the work you've done.
Indeed. Well, first of all, the story, Nancy, was almost one of my early crucial mistakes.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Right. I mean, I think my biggest mistakes was in working with a couple of people who were sexually abused by their fathers. And I don't think I really got the complexity of that and how to handle it. And indeed, it's intricate. It can be quite intricate. Boy, that's a kind of a long story about how I evolved in that direction. But maybe suffice it to say was not really appreciating the nuances, and that, in order for, I believe that for therapy with sexual trauma to be effective, the person must exhibit their own sexual healing. In other words, the person can say, okay, the person did this, they redid that, they understood that it wasn't their fault, and so forth. But if they don't really have a free, spontaneous sexuality with the person that they're intimate with, that they want to be intimate with, that the therapy isn't done. But at the same time, it was really tricky because in order for the person to establish this healthy sexuality, in their mind, it would be excusing what the perpetrator did to them. So it took me a while to really learn how to hold those two together, that they were not the same, that the person's sexuality was their sexuality. Nobody could take that away from them. And that what was done to them was something that, what's the word I'm looking for? That was both confusing and a breaking of a sacred trust. It was really a betrayal of an injustice, a core injustice, and how to deal with this core injustice and to reestablish the full organismic sexuality, somewhat as Wilhelm Reich described in his work, which, by the way, I was very greatly influenced by. To really hold those together and to work with this very delicate subject. I remember this woman wrote a book. I don't remember. I never read the book because I heard her interviewed and I just knew I wouldn't be interested in the book. But basically, her point in this book was that sexual violation by family members was not traumatic. And the point I think that she was trying to make is it's not traumatic in the sense that PTSD is. But also, it can be more confusing, more conflictual than PTSD. So, and she got a lot of, you can imagine a lot of people really, really hated her and felt that she betrayed them. But at the same time, she did have a point that they're not one and the same thing necessarily. Of course, It depends on how it was perpetrated. If there was fear, tremendous fear or physical violence, and, there's all different kinds of variables. But the key is in helping the person untangle this confusion, this betrayal, this sense of injustice, and to demand justice for themselves, for protecting their own adult sexuality, their own adult sensuality. It's difficult. I know I'm not quite getting the right words, and I have to bumble along with this, but it's.
No, but I really think that what you're relating here is coming through, and I really appreciate it, because it does sound so nuanced and complex, and the way you're speaking about these two elements which need to go in order for an individual to become healed. It obviously is very complex. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. So let's kind of move along. We get to one of my favorite questions, which is why. I believe, Peter, that it's really important to know why we're doing something, because I feel it drives us along in our passions, in our journey. So this is a little bit different than what got you into this field in the first place. But share with us, what is your why for doing this day in and day out?
Okay. I'm going to take you back to my childhood. I was about 4 or 5 years old, maybe 6 years old. Okay. I had a little red wagon. I stayed on my grandfather's farm as much as I could because I didn't like the city. And during the summer, we would fill the wagon with vegetables and fruits, and me and my brother, my brother was in the wagon as well, and we would go to these places where there was a bungalow colony and sell the vegetables and fruit. And for that, my grandfather gave us 10% of the gross. He was a bit of a tightwad, you can balance in that. Anyhow, and a very important person in my life. So one day, I was going back, and I had sold everything but a cantaloupe melon. And we stopped for a rest, and then I pulled the wagon, and I noticed the melon going backwards to the back of the back of the wagon. And I looked at it, and I put it up in the front, and I pulled it again, and I was totally perplexed. Why is it that it went in the opposite direction? So then I put the melon up front, and I had my brother pull the handle, pull the wagon, and I was sitting right by the melon. And when he did that, I realized the melon stayed static. It was the wagon that was moving, not the melon. And then I tried with all kinds of balls and so forth. And my mother says, Peter, you discovered Newton's first law. A body in motion tends to stay in motion. A body at rest tends to stay at rest. So I was always hungry for the why of things. And sometimes people say, oh, Peter, you're such a compassionate person. You're such an empathic person. And I hope that that's somewhat true, at least. But I think what drives me even more is my sense of curiosity of how things work and how people heal, as well as the joy of how they heal. But it's really, it's something that I've really never lost. This hunger for knowledge, this wanting to understand the mechanisms of how things work. And I'm still doing that. I'm really doing some work with some colleagues at Dartmouth right now and really trying to understand the neurobiological substrates of what happens in SE therapy. And for honing my clinical skills and my own presence which is continuing my own personal work. Sometimes I'll do a lecture and there's 400 or 500 people in the audience, and I'll say, how many of you have a regular practice? Like yoga or Tai Chi or meditation or something. And when, 15, 20 years ago, nobody raised their hand. Now, often a third or a quarter, a third or half raise their hand. But I think it's essential that therapists have some kind of practice where they stay current with their bodies. But sometimes you still, like, I remember when I lived in Colorado, I lived right on the river. And sometimes I would, it would be a day where I just worked with the most horrendous traumas, atrocities. And people would ask me what I would do. And what I did was first I took my shoes off and went in the river. And first I got some cans, some beer cans or whatever, soda cans. And I would just kick them down the country road that I lived on. And all my neighbors would, they'd say, oh yeah, that's Dr. Levine again. He's had a trying day. And then I would sit by the river and soak my feet in the river. And I needed to really give a voice, or a bodied voice to my anger that people could do such horrible things. And then to wash it away, to kind of, I guess it was like a purification ritual. After I would do something like that, I was back. I was in myself again. And I was, and also sometimes I really did need, I would call up a colleague, a friend colleague, and say, let's talk a little bit, and, this has really been bothering me, and they would do the same with me. So I think really having a regular practice, finding out what works specifically for you, and also having a group of cohorts that you are connected with and that you can touch in with. Because when we work with other people's traumas, it brings up our own traumas, or the parts of our traumas, I should say, that aren't really resolved yet.
So this kind of seems like a perfect segue into advice for early stage trauma therapists. A lot of people listening to this, Peter, are therapists with experience, but who perhaps don't feel that they've worked with trauma, people who've been traumatized before and want to begin to expand their trauma-informed knowledge. Mm-hmm. Others are just beginning to get educated into this arena, this knowledge of trauma-informed practice. What advice would you have for those people who are just beginning on their journey to learn about?
Well, I think the first thing is you got to learn how to show up and be present and shut up and look. Yogi Berra said you can observe a lot just by watching and listening. So again, I think it's our capacity to remain embodied is the most important thing any therapist can do. For beginning therapists or beginning to incorporate trauma work into their practice, I think it's essential to really appreciate the role of the body and how important that is, and learn some basic skills of being able to track, in other words, of being able to observe what's going on in the person's body, and of helping the client be able to contact what's going on in their bodies. And in doing this, helping clients learn how to ground, how to center, how to shift out of states of distress into states of into more ease. There's a phenomenon that I call pendulation. And when we're working in a gradual way, in a titrated way, and the person comes in contact maybe for the first time with their body sensation, because traumatized people, again, they cut off the body. The body's become the enemy because it's the harbinger of the helplessness, of the overwhelm. So they don't want anything to do with it. So when they first begin to sense it for the first time, it feels like it's worse. Well, I guess in a way, I guess it is. But when they're able to contact it just for a short amount of time, and they're able to feel their extremities, feel their sense of grounding, of centering, as they're able to do that, they notice that even though it contracts, then in a relatively short period of time it expands. So think about a hand, an open hand. Okay? So you close the hand into a fist. That's contraction. But then as the fist opens into a hand, that's the expansion. So you have the fist contraction, the hand expansion, and then as you move more and more to expansion, then where did the trauma go? Well, it's that kind of thing. So even just helping clients learn that whatever they're experiencing, no matter how uncomfortable it is, that it will shift, it can shift, and it will shift. And you can help guide them to make that shift. And once you've done that, you've gotten 49% of where you need to go.
So shut up, be present, or show up, be present, and shut up.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, and then really appreciate the role of the body. And of course, you're really talking about us as therapists, really working on ourselves, learning to become aware, learning to be embodied, remain embodied, be conscious of that, and the important role that plays in the work we do for our clients. And also, you talked about just the importance of learning the fundamental, if you will, the basic skills of, tracking and grounding and helping our clients to do those and to center. That's great advice there. So, Peter, can you recommend 2 books, and they don't have to be trauma related, besides Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery, which have had a major impact on the work you do?
Absolutely. That was the first book. She was a pioneer, absolute pioneer. I think actually at the time when I published my book, mine was the 3rd book on trauma. Judith Herman's first, and then Traumatic Stress by Bessel. And before that, people weren't really talking about trauma. It wasn't in the landscape. And I think probably what brought it into the landscape was a combination of the Vietnam War. I mean, of course, there was people experienced trauma symptoms well before that. But the Vietnam War, people returning from the Vietnam War, and the women's movement of the 70s, where it became not okay to traumatize women and children, to be violent towards women and to be violent towards children. I think that brought this up into the cultural zeitgeist. So her book was extremely valuable. I think her emphasis that because trauma is caused that relational trauma is caused in relationship, that it gets healed in the relationship. And I think that there's missing the part where people have to also develop tools. Here's one more point I think that's very important. Therapists, we're mostly really good at being attuned and empathetic. And very often a person who has a lot of trauma, particularly relational trauma, they come in and they feel for the first time in their life that somebody really cares about them, really wants to listen to them, is empathic to what's going on instead of destructive. And it's like, oh my God, this is the first time I feel like there's some hope. But then when they leave, they disintegrate because they go right back into their horrible feelings. And now they're also dependent on the therapist for getting some relief. So what I say is essential, and again, for people who are starting to do trauma therapy, is to help people develop tools that they can use for themselves that give them some sense of empowerment. And then the therapist and client can work together in a partnership rather than the client being wholly, fully dependent on the therapist. So gradually developing this authentic autonomy. And then again, the healing in relationship is very important, but without the tools, then the trauma just keeps grabbing back, and they feel often even more shame and inadequacy that they're unable to do anything by themselves. But of course, the converse of that is when they can do something for themselves, they feel better about themselves. So gradually introducing, actually that was a Sounds True healing trauma book CD that I did, was specifically to help clients develop those kinds of skills so they could do them at the same time as a therapy and become more and more adept at that. So let's see, what other books have been seminal for me. There was also a woman in Berkeley around the time. She wrote a book called Why Is This Happening to Me? And Mestatakis, I think is her name. I thought that was a good book. Reading the work of the ethologists, of Nicholas Kingberg and Konrad Lorenz and many of the other ethologists, was very important to me.
What was Nicholas's last name?
Tinbergen, Tingbergen.
Okay.
He and Konrad Lorenz and Karl von Frisch shared the Nobel Prize in Physiology, and I think it was 1972 or 73. And all of those were about what the body does. All of those were about what the body does, of observing animals. And how do you observe animals? Through their bodies, in their natural environment. But since that time, this field has just all but disappeared. And I was very fortunate when I came to Berkeley to do my graduate work. I was a fellow in the laboratory of neuroethology. And again, there's almost no people, there are few people in the world really pursuing this line of inquiry now. Although we do have the field of evolutionary psychology, which is related. It's related, but it doesn't have that same kind of depth. So the Tinbergen's work, Konrad Lorenz, he's written several books. He's a wonderful writer. And I think he wrote King Solomon's Ring. Or was that von Frisch? No, I think he wrote, here, I forgot, I have a computer. So I'm linked to the rest of the world. And here it is, Konrad Lorenz. Whoops, actually I want to do that by Amazon. So, anyhow.
I will put a link to him up in the show notes.
Yeah. Anyhow, he did write a number of books on imprinting. He was the one who became famous because he became the mother of the ducks, the little baby ducks that followed him around. Right. And but anyhow, he's one of the great. He and Tinbergen and von Frisch were the great people in this field.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
All right, Peter, I will link up your website, and you've got a lot of, you've just got events, you've got books, you've got the Sounds True collection, which I love. I'll put links up to that in the show notes page. And I just want to thank you so much. I mean, this has been like I said, kind of like a mini workshop in the I don't think it's a stretch to say, the history of trauma psychology in a sense, and its treatment and therapy. But thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for your kindness.
And we will be in touch. Thanks again.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was a pleasure. Really, it was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.